Conway Twitty was more than just a country legend. He was a voice that could melt hearts, a man who stood on stage in glittering suits while fans screamed his name, and a star whose songs still echo through the halls of the Grand Ole Opry. To the world, he was Mr. Hello Darlin', a symbol of smooth charm and endless success. But behind the velvet voice and million-selling records was a man who kept his private life sealed away like a locked chest. When Conway passed, his family expected to uncover the usual: old awards, dusty guitars, maybe boxes of tour photographs. But when they descended the narrow staircase into his basement, they found something else, something far more shocking. Behind those walls, in the dim light of a room Conway never shared with outsiders, lay the real story of who he was. It was a discovery that even his closest friends could hardly believe, and it will leave you speechless. Before the basement secrets were uncovered, Conway Twitty's life had already been etched into the heart of American music. Born Harold Lloyd Jenkins in Friars Point, Mississippi, in 1933, he came from humble beginnings that gave him both grit and hunger. His early years were filled with the echoes of gospel choirs and the blues rhythms of the Delta, sounds that would shape his artistry long before the world knew his stage name. As a young man, Conway dreamed not just of survival, but of leaving a mark. Baseball nearly claimed him first. He was offered a chance to play for the Philadelphia Phillies, but fate had other plans. Music called louder, and in the 1950s, he rode the wave of rockabilly with It's Only Make Believe, a hit that rivaled even Elvis Presley. But while the world thought they knew Conway as a heartthrob rock singer, he was already quietly plotting his reinvention. The reinvention came in the late 1960s, when Conway turned fully to country music. It was here he found his true home, blending traditional country storytelling with a smoother, more sensual style. His hits poured out like confessions: Hello Darlin', Tight-Fittin' Jeans, I'd Love to Lay You Down. Each song carried an intimacy that made fans feel he was singing directly to them, whispering secrets in the dark. Yet, while his music was raw with emotion, Conway himself remained guarded. Unlike other stars who lived their controversies in the headlines, Twitty shied away from public drama. He rarely gave interviews about his personal struggles, preferring instead to let the music speak while he kept his own truths hidden. Behind closed doors, Conway was a man of contradictions. He was a devoted father, but often absent due to endless tours. He was generous to friends and fans, but carried grudges in silence. He built an empire with Twitty City, a dazzling public showcase of his career, yet even there, he kept certain rooms locked, as if afraid to let the world see too much. Fans believed they knew him through his lyrics, but those who worked closest to him knew he kept many parts of himself walled off. This is where the story of the basement becomes haunting. For decades, that private space beneath his home was off-limits, a place even family seldom entered. Conway kept it carefully guarded, treating it less like storage and more like a personal vault of memories, secrets, and stories that never made it into song. To understand why what was found there was so shocking, you first have to understand this duality: Conway Twitty, the superstar who gave everything to his fans through his voice, but almost nothing of himself in reality. His basement was not just a room. It was the physical embodiment of the man he didn't want the world to see. By the early 1980s, Conway Twitty was more than a country singer. He was an institution, a man whose name and music carried the weight of an empire. At the center of that empire was Twitty City, his sprawling estate in Hendersonville, Tennessee, which he opened to the public in 1982. To the outside world, Twitty City was a paradise built from the dreams of a superstar. A shimmering compound where fans could stroll through manicured gardens, admire displays of his stage costumes, and even glimpse the private life of the man who had given them so many unforgettable songs. Visitors were welcomed as if they were family, treated to tours that showcased the softer side of Conway, his faith, his philanthropy, and his dedication to the people who had made him a legend. It became a destination as famous as the man himself, drawing thousands each year who longed to feel closer to the star whose voice had carried them through heartbreak and hope. But behind the carefully polished surface of Twitty City was a man still wrestling with what to share and what to hide. Conway's home became a stage in itself, a museum of curated memories, and yet there were lines he refused to let anyone cross. Even as fans marveled at the gold records lining the walls and the personal touches scattered across the property, certain doors remained locked. Those who worked there noticed the pattern. Conway was generous with what he wanted the public to see, but protective, even secretive, about the areas of his life that unsettled him. The basement was chief among those places. Though Twitty City was meant to symbolize transparency, Conway's heart remained shielded in shadow. His children and closest friends often wondered what drove him to such guardedness. Perhaps it was his relentless pursuit of perfection, the pressure of always living up to the image fans had of him. Perhaps it was old wounds, scars from years in the music industry, betrayals, or battles he never wanted anyone to see. Whatever the reason, the basement became a space of silence in a home filled with music. While thousands of fans walked through Twitty City, snapping photos and soaking in the spectacle, not one of them could have imagined that beneath their feet lay a hidden chamber where Conway stored fragments of his true self. Twitty City showed the world the polished surface, the gleaming crown of a king. The basement, hidden in plain sight, held the tangled truth of the man who wore it. And when that basement was finally opened, the contents inside would rewrite everything people thought they knew about Conway Twitty. When Conway Twitty passed away in June of 1993, the world mourned the loss of a voice that had defined a generation of country music. But for his family, the mourning came with another responsibility, the task of sorting through his vast estate. Twitty City was filled with treasures, from gold records and glittering costumes to photographs that spanned decades of stardom. But when they reached the house itself and turned toward the basement, there was a noticeable shift in the air. For years, Conway had kept that basement sealed, warning his children not to meddle with its contents and keeping outsiders firmly away. Some assumed it was merely storage, a practical space for tour equipment and dusty memorabilia. But those who knew Conway best suspected there was more, something he had intentionally locked away from the eyes of both family and fans. When the heavy door was finally opened, the creak of its hinges seemed to break a silence that had lingered for decades. Descending the staircase, the family entered a room that felt frozen in time. The light bulbs overhead flickered faintly, casting shadows over rows of stacked boxes, trunks, cabinets, and shelves. Dust coated nearly every surface, as though the items had been untouched for years, yet there was a strange sense of order to the chaos. Every box was labeled in Conway's own hand, some with cryptic notes, others with only single words: private, keep, unfinished. The air was thick, not only with dust, but with the weight of secrets long hidden. As the family began to lift the lids from boxes and pry open the rusted locks of trunks, their initial curiosity gave way to something else: astonishment. This was not a storage room. This was Conway Twitty's vault. Inside were objects that stretched far beyond ordinary memorabilia. Reels of tape marked with strange symbols, envelopes filled with unsent letters, journals written in Conway's looping script, and even items that suggested feuds and heartbreaks the world never knew about. Each discovery peeled back a layer of the man they thought they knew, revealing vulnerabilities, contradictions, and passions he had guarded fiercely during his lifetime. Some boxes contained old costumes and guitars, reminders of the glittering career he shared with millions. Others, however, revealed a far darker and more intimate side, one Conway had clearly chosen to bury deep below ground. In that dim basement, as dust rose around them and silence pressed in on every corner, the family realized they were standing in the middle of Conway's last confession. And though they did not yet grasp the full extent of what they had uncovered, one thing was clear: their father's legacy was about to change forever. Among the first discoveries in Conway Twitty's basement were boxes that seemed ordinary at first glance, but inside lay dozens of reel-to-reel recordings, cassette tapes, and even a few old film canisters. Each was carefully labeled in Conway's familiar handwriting, though the words on the labels offered little clarity. Some bore simple titles like Home, Practice, or Demo, while others were marked with numbers, dates, or single cryptic words like Truth or Final. When the family cautiously played the first reel, what filled the room was not the polished, radio-ready sound fans had come to expect. Instead, it was Conway raw and unfiltered, sitting alone with a guitar, strumming chords and singing in a voice rough with emotion. These were not songs meant for public ears. They were half-finished ideas, confessions wrapped in melody, lyrics scribbled in pain or longing. Some of the tapes revealed a man chasing perfection, recording take after take until frustration boiled over. Others contained material so personal it bordered on diary entries, where Conway sang about regret, guilt, and moments in his life that never made it to interviews or stage banter. On one tape, he recounted in song the pressures of fame, how it tore at his family life, how the endless tours left him staring at hotel ceilings, questioning who he really was. On another, he sang quietly about friends he had lost, feuds that had left scars, and choices he wished he could undo. These recordings were haunting in their intimacy, exposing a side of Conway no fan ever suspected. But perhaps most shocking were the tapes that weren't music at all. A few reels captured conversations, Conway speaking into a recorder late at night, as though unburdening himself to the only confidant he trusted, the machine. In them, he spoke of people he admired, people who betrayed him, and feelings he never dared say aloud. One tape, labeled simply "Keep," revealed Conway recounting a bitter conflict with another country star, his voice tense as he vented emotions he never would have admitted publicly. Another tape was little more than a confession, a long, rambling meditation on mortality, where Conway questioned what legacy he would leave behind and whether people would ever truly know him beyond the songs. Hearing these tapes was like entering the chambers of a man's heart after he was gone, and for his family, it was both heartbreaking and enlightening. They realized that while the world adored the polished superstar, the basement tapes revealed the lonely, restless soul beneath. The discovery of these recordings alone would have been enough to rewrite his story, but they were only the beginning. For hidden deeper in the basement were items that cut even closer to the bone, letters and notes that laid bare Conway Twitty's unspoken truths. If the tapes revealed Conway Twitty's unguarded voice, then the letters discovered in his basement revealed his unguarded soul. Neatly bundled in envelopes and tied together with twine, the stacks of paper carried decades of unspoken emotion. Some were letters Conway had written to family members but never sent. His handwriting pressed hard into the page, as though the weight of his feelings etched themselves into the paper. Others were drafts of correspondence to fellow musicians, managers, and even rivals, words filled with anger, disappointment, or sorrow that he ultimately chose to keep hidden. One envelope was marked simply, "Not for them," and inside was a heartfelt message to his children, detailing regrets about the time his career had stolen from them. He wrote about missing birthdays, missing school recitals, missing quiet dinners around the table. And while he showered them with gifts and luxuries, he admitted he could never replace what was truly lost: time. Another packet of letters contained unfiltered accounts of his struggles with trust in the music industry. He named names, describing betrayals by people who once stood at his side. There were feuds with artists the public never knew about, contracts that left him feeling cheated, and business decisions that gnawed at him long after the ink dried. The words painted a picture of a man both proud and wounded, determined to protect his image, yet carrying a burden of bitterness that he could never resolve publicly. Perhaps most haunting were the unsent letters to women he had loved and lost. They were not grand declarations, but quiet admissions of guilt, longing, and apology. In one, he spoke of a romance overshadowed by his fame, how he wished he had been more honest, how he feared his pursuit of music had cost him the chance at lasting happiness. In another, he admitted that while he sang about love with convincing passion, he often felt like a stranger to it in his personal life. The words were raw, unpolished, and devastatingly human. There were also letters addressed to himself, diary-like notes, where Conway reflected on his mortality. He wrote of wondering how he would be remembered, questioning whether people would ever truly understand the man behind the songs. "They hear my voice," one line read, "but they don't hear me." These letters were not meant for stage lights or headlines. They were meant for no one. And yet, in their discovery, they spoke louder than any interview or memoir ever could. For the family, reading them was like stepping into the deepest corners of Conway's heart, a place that had always been closed to the outside world. And, as emotional as the letters were, they were only part of the basement's revelations. For alongside them sat boxes filled with items so unusual and unexpected that they transformed the basement from a vault of secrets into a museum of Conway's hidden life. Beyond the tapes and the letters lay something even more tangible, a collection of objects that turned the basement into a vault of Conway Twitty's hidden world. At first glance, it resembled a museum storage room. Rows of costumes from his glory days on stage, sequined jackets and tailored suits, still carrying the faint scent of cologne and sweat. Cowboy boots worn down from countless performances, guitars with strings snapped but preserved as if Conway had set them down only yesterday. Yet, as the family dug deeper, it became clear this was no simple archive. There were unopened boxes of fan mail stacked to the ceiling. Thousands of envelopes Conway had kept but never answered, as though he couldn't bear to throw away the devotion of strangers. Many were unopened, their words of love and admiration sealed in silence, reminders of how much he meant to ordinary people who poured out their hearts to him. In another corner stood framed photographs never hung on walls, images of Conway with presidents, movie stars, and country music royalty, moments captured with legends of the past, but hidden from public view. Some photographs were more personal, snapshots of family vacations, candid images of children growing up while Conway was away on tour, proof of the life he was constantly torn between. There were journals, too, leather-bound books filled with notes about song ideas, to-do lists, and reflections scribbled in margins. One journal contained detailed accounts of tour schedules, grueling months on the road that left little room for rest or family. Another journal read almost like a confession, with Conway admitting the toll fame had taken on his body and spirit. Then came the stranger items, souvenirs from cities he had visited, hotel keys, trinkets from fans, even a collection of pocket watches and rings that seemed to symbolize the passage of time. Each object felt loaded with meaning, as if Conway couldn't part with anything that carried a piece of his journey. Perhaps most striking was a trunk filled with gifts he had bought but never given, jewelry, handwritten cards, and even wrapped toys for his children that had remained unopened, like frozen promises from a father who wanted to be present but was always pulled away by the demands of the spotlight. To see all these items together was overwhelming, for they told a story no biography or documentary had captured. The basement was not just a vault of memorabilia, it was Conway's unspoken testimony, a chronicle of both triumph and regret, glory and loneliness. Every artifact whispered that the man the world adored was also a man who carried burdens too heavy for the stage. And, as astonishing as these objects were, the family soon realized that hidden among the treasures were discoveries that would shake even their understanding of who Conway truly was. Controversial finds that revealed the side of him he had worked hardest to conceal. As the family continued to sift through the dimly lit basement, what began as awe quickly turned into unease. For hidden among the costumes, journals, and keepsakes were items that revealed a side of Conway Twitty few could have ever imagined. These were not the polished relics of a superstar's career, but the shadows he had deliberately buried. In one box, they found legal documents, contracts, lawsuits, and settlement papers that hinted at bitter disputes with former business partners and fellow musicians. Some revealed financial entanglements and betrayals that never reached the press. Feuds with men who once stood on stage beside him, but later became enemies. These documents painted a portrait of a man who had fought to protect his empire, but often at great personal cost. Another discovery sent chills through the room. Handwritten lists of names, some of them country legends, next to cryptic notes. Phrases like, "never again," "can't trust," and "keep out." Were these lists Conway's way of recording grudges, or reminders of those who had wronged him? No one could say for certain, but the bitterness in his words suggested wounds that fame never healed. Among the letters were also fragments of darker confessions. One draft, unsent, accused a close friend of betrayal so deep that Conway wrote he would never look at him the same again. Another spoke of exhaustion so overwhelming he contemplated walking away from music entirely, admitting he feared he was just a ghost in rhinestones. These were not the words of the confident man fans saw on stage, but of someone grappling with demons no one around him truly understood. Even stranger were certain personal effects that seemed out of place, a locked wooden box containing photographs that had been deliberately cut or burned, their faces obscured as though Conway wanted to erase memories he could not live with. Letters marked "Destroy," filled with anger and despair. And in one corner, a battered tape recorder with a single cassette still inside, its label scratched off. When played, it carried only Conway's voice, not singing but speaking, his tone low and heavy. He spoke of secrets he could never share, mistakes he would take to his grave, and a legacy he feared might collapse if the truth ever surfaced. These finds cast Conway in a far more complicated light than the loving crooner fans adored. They showed a man burdened by the contradictions of fame, torn between his image and his reality. A man whose kindness was matched by moments of bitterness, whose generosity was shadowed by scars left by betrayal. For his family, these discoveries were as painful as they were enlightening. The basement was no longer just a treasure trove. It was a mirror, reflecting the sides of Conway Twitty that had always been hidden from the spotlight. And yet, even with all the tapes, letters, and controversial items, the final impact of the basement would not come from any single object, but from the way the discoveries forced the world to rethink the legacy of a man they thought they knew. The discoveries in Conway Twitty's basement forced his family, his fans, and the music world to confront a truth that was far more complex than the polished image he had left behind. For decades, he had been the embodiment of country music romance, the man whose voice could soothe a broken heart and make every listener feel personally loved. But the basement stripped away the rhinestones and revealed the man beneath, the father who regretted missed moments, the artist who wrestled with perfection and doubt, the friend who carried grudges and betrayals in silence, and the human being who feared his legacy might one day fade into dust. The tapes revealed his soul in song. Not just the hits that climbed the charts, but the private recordings filled with longing, bitterness, and vulnerability. They showed that even a man celebrated as the smoothest voice in Nashville battled demons he dared not share with the world. The letters revealed his guilt and regret, especially toward his children, and his longing for honesty in relationships that fame had fractured. They showed a Conway who wanted desperately to be heard, not just as a performer, but as a man, yet who could never bring himself to expose those truths in public. The memorabilia, too, spoke volumes: unopened fan mail, unused gifts, journals, and candid photographs that told of a man stretched between two worlds, one of dazzling fame and one of aching solitude. And the controversial finds, the burned photographs, the bitter notes, the recorded confessions, these revealed the shadows he kept buried, shadows he feared would undo the legend he had built. Yet in a strange way, those very discoveries did not tarnish his legacy, but deepened it. They proved that Conway Twitty was not an untouchable icon, but a man of flesh and blood, vulnerable and flawed, who carried the same wounds and insecurities as those who loved his music. His songs were not just carefully crafted ballads. They were extensions of the struggles he could not put into plain words. Knowing what lay hidden in his basement makes every lyric resonate differently. When he sang "Hello, Darlin'," perhaps he was not only serenading a lover, but speaking to the regrets he could never let go of. When he sang of love and loss, he was not just performing for a crowd, but confessing to himself in ways only the basement walls ever heard. For his family, the basement was both painful and healing. It forced them to see their father not as a flawless legend, but as a man who had carried the weight of expectations too heavy for one person. It allowed them to understand his silences, his absences, and the contradictions that shaped his life. And for the world, the revelations added layers to the myth of Conway Twitty, reminding us that behind every superstar is a private world we may never truly grasp. The basement was his final stage, the place where the mask fell away and the man spoke in whispers, scratches, and scrawled words left behind in dust and shadow. In the end, what they found in Conway Twitty's basement did not destroy him. It immortalized him in a new way. It showed that his greatness was not in being larger than life, but in being achingly human. His voice still echoes in country music, but now so does his silence. And perhaps that silence is louder than the applause ever was. Because down in that basement, where secrets and sorrows mingled with trophies and triumphs, Conway Twitty finally told his truest story. And in that silence, he spoke louder than he ever did in song.